You're all stronger than you know. As Americans, we are all stronger than we know. So you see, this fact became brutally clear to all of us on September 11th, 2001, as I was standing with our nation's highest leaders as the attack on America was in progress. But let me back up. As you heard, I grew up in the Marine Corps. I grew up flying attack helicopters. I served in the first Gulf War, and then again in 1993 I was deployed to Somalia, Africa. In June of 1998, I put a package in and I was selected to fly with Marine Helicopter Squadron 1, HMX-1, the Presidential Helicopter Squadron. Our job is to support the President and the Vice President with helicopter operations worldwide. What people don't realize is our President only flies in our helicopter. He only rides in our limousines. He only talks on our phones. He's only seen by our doctors. He only eats the food we approve for him to eat. And that happens worldwide. In October of 2000, I was then asked to be the squadron representative in the White House military office, where my job was to do those logistics. So we would have the Air Force carry all those presidential assets worldwide. So the moment the President stepped off Air Force One, those helicopters, limousines, Secret Service snipers, doctors, everything he needed to perform his executive agenda was there waiting for him, fully rehearsed and ready to go. And then when he was done and he was wheels up on Air Force One, we had the Air Force come in with all the heavy lift assets and we would clean up that location and move it either to another location or back to Andrews Air Force Base in Virginia. September 11th, I'm in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, 8:46. Someone came running into our office and said, "Hey sir, turn on CNN. Apparently a small aircraft had just struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center." Like all of you, we turned on the TV. We couldn't help but notice what a beautiful, clear blue day it was, 78 degrees in Manhattan. And why would a pilot run into a 110-story landmark on a day like that? He had the East River to his right, he had the Hudson River to his left, and most aviators could even glide if they had to and reach LaGuardia Airport. There must be much more to this story than we know. Sure enough, the phones were ringing and we found out that was American Airlines Flight 11. It departed Boston Logan Airport. It was on its way out to California to land at LAX. It was off course over Albany, New York, down the Hudson River, and hit the building at over 500 miles an hour. 9:03. Just like all of you, we were still in that Eisenhower building when we saw this aircraft come into view. I remember yelling up at the TV screen, "Hey, what's this moron doing?" Trying to get a look at the hole in the North Tower when we watched him careen into the South Tower at certainly what looked like full power to us. My boss was an Air Force full bird colonel. He came in the room and said, "Everybody stop what you're doing, eyeballs on me. We have a full-blown terrorist event unfolding right before our eyes in the city of New York. Stand by for a lot of White House designated missions." And really what that means is whenever we have a national disaster anywhere in our country, we have amazing resources, expertise, people and equipment that need and want to go to these national disaster sites. But there's only so many heavy lift assets. So what they end up doing is they call the White House and they say, "Hey boss, this is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I need to be up there at ground zero." And he goes, "Go." Once the president says go, they become a 1 Alpha 1 priority mission. We will push baby food out of the back, out of the next available asset to get them and their people airborne and up to the site about as quick as we can make it happen. On 9/11, we were now fielding all the phone calls from all the government agencies requesting 1 Alpha 1 priority and now diverting every Air Force asset in the sky into Andrews Air Force Base. And what we're going to do is we call rack 'em and stack 'em. Get them on the ground, fill them with gas, and have them stand by. A lot of government agencies and people heading their way to get up there to assist the people of New York. 9:30. As we're working the 1 Alpha 1s, an airline overflew the White House. The White House is prohibited airspace. If you're not Marine One, nobody overflies the White House ever. And yet this jet was so low and so loud, we froze right there in our spot, right where we were. Somebody ran to a window and goes, holy mackerel. I just saw a big white jet, hard left-hand turn, heading west. 9:37. Breaking news, fire and explosion over at the Pentagon. This aircraft that just violated the airspace over the White House must have been the same aircraft that just careened into the west side of the Pentagon. It turned out they were two separate aircraft. The aircraft that just violated the president's airspace was none other than an Air Force E-4B, a nuclear command and control platform. Because on 9/11, our military was doing a huge nuclear exercise. We had parked this national level asset out at Andrews Air Force Base, and when the second tower was hit, they scrambled it and said, get to the President of the United States. And when this big 747 with the weird cone on top dialed in the President's location and they had a laser line, it took them right over the White House. They were full operational, and they're heading to Sarasota, Florida to join up with the President. The aircraft that struck the Pentagon was none other than American Airlines Flight 77. It took off at a Dulles Airport just west of Virginia, went as far as Ohio, made a right-hand 180, came back, right-hand 360 over top of Washington, D.C., and careened into the west side of the Pentagon at 9:37. But literally this 757 carrying innocents and this 747 with military members must have passed each other in flight as one was racing to the President and the other was hijacked and careening into the west side of our Pentagon. 9:45, White House ordered evacuated. All the loudspeakers blared to life. Eisenhower Executive Office Building, White House West Wing, and everything else ordered to be emptied right now and make it happen. My boss again came in, said, shut it down. We got to go to the alternate site. I said, sir, I can't go. Wherever President Bush is going to go today, because it's obvious he's not coming back to Washington, D.C., he's going to need limousines, helicopters, phones, Secret Service, snipers, doctors, everything that we do in airlift operations. He said, well, you can't do it from here. Go across the street, go inside the President's Emergency Operations Center, do logistics from there. The rest of us are going to go to the alternate site. I got to the top of the staircase. I'm looking over at the West Wing. I had to stop just for a second and pause because the White House is a living fortress. And yet on 9/11, the gates to the north were wide open, the gates to the south were wide open, Secret Service all had automatic weapons, and they're yelling in bullhorns, ladies, take off your heels and run, there's another plane inbound. And watching these young 20-year-old professional people dropping their purses, kicking off their shoes, sprinting off the White House complex was really just an unbelievable sight. Got across the street, showed my credentials, Secret Service lets me in. Before long, I'm underground, a door you and I can't pull on, opens, enters, I enter, and I'm in the President's Emergency Operations Center, the bunker under the White House. The first person I see was a Vice President's military aide, good friend of mine. I said, Tom, I'm here to do logistics. I'll stay out of your way. He said, Bob, forget logistics. Answer the phones. They're ringing off the hook. I looked at this console of military members all working the phones, answering the radios, taking notes, doing what they're trained to do, and I can see at the very end there's an empty console, and as I got close to it, I could hear the phone ringing. I got down there, I dropped my planning kit, 9:52, when I picked up the phone and said, Major Darling. And the gentleman on the other end said, Major, we have another hijacked plane 16 miles south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, inbound Washington, D.C. Naturally, I told him, well, you're going to have to hold on. And I spun to my right to pass this information to the military aide. And who's standing next to me but Vice President Cheney? Behind him was his wife, Lynn. Here comes Dr. Rice, the National Security Advisor. Behind her was Stephen Hadley, her deputy. Norman Mineta, the Secretary of Transportation. And everybody else who was in the West Wing that morning was now evacuated underground into the bunker complex as a result of the violation of P-56, that Air Force E-4B. Coming over to my console to hear about this new hijacked plane somewhere south of Pittsburgh. I immediately snapped to, Mr. Vice President, we have another hijacked plane coming at us, sir. They were reported south of Pittsburgh. He turned to his left, and up on the wall were these 3 speaker boxes. They're all landlines, phone lines. He can talk to anybody he wants to talk to. They immediately patch him through to the FAA. He goes, Rick, it's the Vice President. I just got word we have another hijacked plane somewhere south of Pittsburgh. Can you confirm that for me? Mr. Vice President, that aircraft is not talking. It is not squawking a transponder code given air traffic control, altitude, airspeed, and direction. Mr. Vice President, that's a hijacked aircraft. He goes to the other speaker box. He's looking for Donald Rumsfeld, the other member of the National Command Authority who can give offensive lethal instructions to the U.S. military. Donald Rumsfeld was not in the building. As a result of the impact of Flight 77, he ran outside to assist with the wounded. We had the president getting on Air Force One. We had Donald Rumsfeld outside the building. The Vice President Cheney then said, "General, I want you to listen to me. I want 2 F-15s. I want them at Otis Air National Guard Base in Cape Cod. Let me know when they're airborne. Stand by to shoot this aircraft down." And I remember naturally I took a step away from him. I turned because in my mind, our job in the U.S. military was to create options for the president. That's what we do. And on 9/11, with the president getting on the aircraft and the Secretary of Defense outside, we weren't just creating options, we were executing plans. And I looked at Vice President Cheney completely differently that day, and I realized this is not an ordinary politician. This is somebody who was a congressman from Wyoming, a chief of staff for President Ford, a Secretary of Defense for the first President Bush, and now Vice President of the United States. And he just unleashed the United States Air Force to intercept a civilian airliner. Really, minutes later, we heard those F-15s. They were airborne. They were 1,200 miles an hour. They were supersonic. They were 5 minutes away from United Flight 93, and without hesitation, he said, "Shoot that aircraft down." Everybody then went quiet. It was a military mission in action, and all of a sudden, we heard at 10:05, aircraft down, 68 miles south of Pittsburgh. No survivors. I remember staring at Vice President Cheney. He had his back to us. He was looking up at those 3 speaker boxes. He spun around. He came right over to my console and he said, "Major, for the congressional investigation, state your full name." And I'm thinking, unbelievable. I was here to do logistics, and now I'm in between the Vice President and the U.S. military taking action against a hijacked civilian airliner. So I stated my name. He turned, he said, "From Major Darling and the National Military Command Center to the Vice President, we just shot that plane down. I really need to talk to the President." And now everybody turned to, and they're going, "Air Force One, Air Force One." This is the PEOC. And they're trying to raise the president up on the net. And just as he was doing that, all those same radios blared back to life. The F-15s never fired. The F-15s never fired. 40 innocent, ordinary Americans united themselves when they learned from loved ones, we got 3 planes and 3 targets. This is not a ransom mission. We're not going to Cuba. If we don't take action, we're just going to sit here and we're going to die. And they did. They stormed the cockpit. They fought back with these terrorists. They won. They ultimately overpowered those terrorists. That plane went completely inverted and hit in a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania at over 500 miles an hour. They said that when the FBI went out there to comb the wreckage of Flight 93, the last piece of steel was found 40 feet down in the ground. Ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things to save each other on 9/11. The president now is on the net, Vice President and he are having discussions, and all of a sudden, 10:08, CNN is now reporting that, in fact, the South Tower of the World Trade Center had collapsed just moments before. He literally said, "Mr. President, while I got you on the phone, sir, we're getting a report here the South Tower of the World Trade Center complex has collapsed." He flipped over a sheet of paper, he starts scribbling some rough order math, and he goes, "Mr. President, it's my best guess. We have 20,000 dead Americans in the city of New York." "Mr. President, while I got you on the phone, sir, a portion of the Pentagon has just collapsed. Again, I don't have accurate figures. It's my best guess. We have 800 to 1,000 dead Americans over at the Pentagon." They quickly turned their back to us. They had some private words. They hung up the phone. Immediately, just a few minutes later, but we're now at 10:29. We lost the North Tower. President's back on the net. "Mr. President, we lost 40,000 dead Americans in the city of New York." President Bush didn't say a word. He was overcome. We thought maybe it was one of those phone calls that actually dropped off the net. And then finally he came back and he said, "What is Mayor Giuliani saying? Does anyone talk to Mayor Giuliani?" "No, sir. No phone call with the mayor's office." "What about the hospitals? What are the hospitals saying as far as dead and wounded up there in the city of New York? What are we getting from them?" Sir, no reports from any hospitals in the city of New York. He goes, what about FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency? What are they seeing on the ground up there? What are they saying? And he goes, Mr. President, FEMA hasn't even left yet. And you had this overwhelming sense of despair that the President of the United States, who's been president for 8 months, he's got over 300 million Americans counting on him, an hour and 42 minutes after the attack began, and we had no response from the federal government to help the people of New York. And despite the horrific loss of life that day, where we told the President we had as much as 40,000 dead Americans, in fact, we had only a fraction of that. Why? Because ordinary Americans did extraordinary things to save each other. Again, just like Flight 93, these Americans up there in New York City, ferry boat captains, stockbrokers, lawyers, construction workers, shopkeepers, opened up their stores and their hearts after as soon as they could, when they felt safe, to save somebody else, a life of another person. Unbelievable bravery and resilience. And we saw it again with the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary, the Boston bombing up at the Marathon. We just saw it again at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, and as recently as a few weeks ago at the open air concert in Las Vegas, Nevada. Americans doing extraordinary things to save each other. From that moment on, I stopped saying that. And I decided it's not ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things, it's extraordinary Americans doing heroic things to save each other. When it comes to bravery, perseverance, and resilience, Americans have cornered the market. But we're talking about bridges today. So how do we bridge this great American trait called resilience and turn it into a level of sustained performance? Resilience isn't a strategy, it's a trait. As a nation, we have to get better. We just can't keep counting on resilience. How are we going to take it to the next level? You know, I put a lot of thought into this, and I realized it's really not much different than a young athlete who has incredible natural talent, and then he's all of a sudden developed, or she developed into an Olympian or world record holder. How does that happen? How do you take somebody from a young age and develop them into a champion? And I realized it's training, it's coaching, and it's practice. And we need to do the same thing now in America. We need to train more crisis leaders, men and women who are able to lead us in times of uncertainty, willing to stand up, make a decision, communicate clearly and effectively, and ultimately have a little empathy so the rest of us can heal and recover. We need coaching. We need to get more experts in our organizations and develop our business continuity plans, our disaster recovery plans, our emergency communication plans. We need to make sure that they are not only understood, but they are accessible 24 hours a day. And finally, we need to practice. And by practice, it means as an organization or a company or a community, we need to do tabletop exercises so our leaders know what to do and what their roles and responsibilities are in any type of tragedy. And we need to do full-blown exercises with everyone involved, maybe even include our first responders from our communities and our community leaders to come on in, so together we can learn how to recognize, react, recover, respond to any world crisis or any adverse event in our communities today. Let's face it, if you read the news, crisis leadership and management is no longer a luxury. It's now a requirement. It's a necessity given the world that we live in today. So I want to tell you this. In closing, I want you all to do me a favor and never forget 9/11. I also want you to never pass up the opportunity to thank those that protect and serve us, heal us, or defend our freedoms and our way of life. And lastly, never forget the enormous impact each of you have in the lives of so many. So God bless you, and God bless the United States. Thank you.